The town may be kind of small, but these folks have big smiles and big hearts, and they know what it is to have simple fun down our way, where old-fashioned singing and homey gatherings make living mighty pleasant.
And I eventually went and started playing drums on the house drum kit that was up there, and I don't know how to play drums, so it was just a disaster. I ended up just destroying the kit, which happened to not be the house kit, but it belonged to a drummer from one of the other bands, and he got mad at me and asked me for money, and I didn't have any money, so I rolled up like 5 $1 bills in a $20 bill, and I gave it to him pretending it was $100, and then I just ran out of there, you know. But so that band was just sort of ill-fated.
Dave's rolling.
Welcome to Abandoned Albums, the documentary podcast where we take a closer look at some albums that may have been forgotten about over time, some albums you might not even know existed, and some albums by up-and-coming artists we think you should know about. I'm your host, Keith R. Higgins, and joining me once again is Mr. Jeff Calhoun.
Thank you, Keith.
On this episode of Abandoned Albums, Jeff and I welcome Popsicko bass player Marko DeSantis and writer S.W. Lauden into Thunderlove Studio.
The paper doesn't give many details. Tell me about this.
Popsicko took shape in the early 1990s and called Santa Barbara their home. The band was Keith Brown on guitar and vocals, Tim Cullen on guitar and vocals, Marko DeSantis on bass, and Mick Flowers on drums. Now, while the band may have only recorded the one album, Off to a Bad Start, they cast a long shadow on the Santa Barbara music scene. Unfortunately, Popsicko suffered the ills of what many bands do, the infiltration of drugs. And just as the band was starting to get some serious industry attention, they went on a prolonged hiatus. That hiatus turned permanent in November of 1995 when lead singer Keith Brown died in a car accident. Jeff and I got the chance to speak with Popsicko bass player Marko DeSantis and writer S.W. Lauden, who was a very good friend of lead singer Keith Brown. The Popsicko album may be called Off to a Bad Start, but with the help of the remaining band members, Lauden, and Big Stir Records, its upcoming re-release tells me that bad start is going to turn into a strong finish. We cover a lot of territory in this episode, so strap yourself in for a great story. Here's our conversation with Marko DeSantis and S.W. Lauden. I want to welcome you guys here, and I want to thank Steve for reaching out and putting us in contact. I want to start by pulling a quote that you wrote, Marko, and the two would-have-beens in oral history of Popsicko, which accompanies the album. You said this, yes. You said this, and I quote, "It's quite startling how time passes. Days ally with weeks and gather in secret and conspire to become years that eventually join forces as decades. We've got all the time in the world becomes, where does the time go? A kind of peaceful surrender confronted by anyone lucky enough to grow older. Keith lived fast and unfortunately died young. So now it's up to the rest of us to show you what we did together. While he's still gone, we're still here. The music made will survive us all." That just smacked me right across the face. It's really, really great wording. And it's so fucking true. And it begs the question, why is now the right time to release the record?
It's one of those things where even though you're still young and you're working on new things and you're excited, that's kind of our default setting, is to be like working on something new, being, kind of like looking at the past and going, yeah, one day I'll get around to writing a memoir. One day I'll get around to putting out that old music I put out back then. But right now I'm too excited about the stuff I'm doing right in front of me. I've always been a really sentimental, reflective type of person. I save all this shit. I have all this, I love that kind of stuff. Which is why I threw that Richard Hell quote in there that, memories are better than life, from his book Go Now, where it's like, I make the decisions based on sensing what will produce the best memory. Like sometimes I'm enjoying something in the moment, but I'm also thinking, how is this going to feel in retrospect too? But anyways, I think that's what happened. It's just one of those things, like me and Mick, our drummer Mick Flowers, and our other guitar player, singer Tim Cullen, and then, Steve Coulter here, who's, one of our singer Keith's dearest friends, oldest friends. We all just were, kind of thinking like, this music needs to needs to be heard by people other than the small little handful of people that have heard it. And none of us are currently like actively promoting any of our current projects or recent projects. So maybe this is just as good of a time as any, because you always look for those, like, what's the 20-year anniversary or the 25-year anniversary? And then it's like, after a while, you're like, who fucking cares? You know, it's just, this came out almost 30 years ago. Originally, we made these songs up and recorded them ourselves and then put it out ourselves. And then, you know, Keith died shortly after. He died in late 1995. And we all just kind of went on with our lives. And so it just seemed like, well, one day we'll get around to doing it. One day we'll get around to do it. There's never really the right time to do it. But all of a sudden, it just, I think what, Steve, you started thinking about Keith, and probably and it has more to do with Steve, to be honest. Probably what was the catalyst for this project. He had this idea to do kind of an oral history of the band and just kind of celebrate Keith's life in our hometown paper. And that kind of, you know, because me and Steve just are old friends and we just start talking, we're like, well, we should do something. We should expand it into something else. And maybe we could do a re-release and maybe eventually put out the unreleased stuff. And he had this relationship with this cool label called Big Stir. And we all just kind of got to talking, and they seemed really passionate about the music. And, you know, we were just like, you know what? No better time than now.
Yeah, it definitely unfolded very naturally. I had the idea that I kind of always knew, because I owed Keith so much for sort of really changing the direction of my life when we got to know each other in high school and first started playing in bands together. That friendship and the bands that it led to, and the relocation up to Santa Barbara that it led to, and other bands and other formations of bands that it led to, completely changed the direction of my life. And I never really forgot that. And I knew I wanted to help tell Keith's story and the band's story one day. And I think the pandemic did get me thinking about it. I was also getting reconnected with new music for the first time in a really long time. And as I listened to this new music, I was like, God, the kids who listen to this would love Popsicko, or would love Nerf Herder, or would love all these other bands that we were connected to. And so the way it unfolded is I just texted Marko one day and said, hey, I want to do an oral history of Popsicko and just throw it up on my Medium page. You down with that? And literally, 2 years later, or 2.5 years later, it led to this point where there's a fully printed book, oral history. There's the first time on vinyl re-release. And we're doing things like doing podcast interviews together. And I think that it needed to happen that way. It couldn't be forced, and I couldn't be hired to do it. We had to do it because we meant it, and it meant something to us.
This was purely a labor of love. It was never thought to be like, oh, this is going to make us a lot of money. We're going to get some licensing deals. It was just simply something we felt like we owed to this mutual friend that we have that, in different ways really did affect us.
I feel like, Marko, we're probably very kindred spirits in researching Popsicko and kind of looking at your career. Man, I feel like you're just a dude that can't not be in love with rock and roll.
I guess so. Which is a euphemism for I'm incredibly immature.
And we're going to talk primarily about the Popsicko record and project, but I want to take you back to like the very beginning of your career in Santa Barbara, and start us off because you and I kind of have a similar entry point where you're at the record store starting to make your own choices as like a young adolescent human being, thumbing through the bins, and you stop and you go, "Rich kids on LSD. What is this all about?" And like that was your hometown hero.
Yeah, that was Santa Barbara's a pretty small town in Southern California, and you have that weird like small town imposter syndrome. Like you just assume like, well, if all the real stuff that's happening is happening in LA or probably happened 20 years ago in New York City or London, or you just assume that nothing that would ever happen in your town would ever be the official thing or the real thing. But like so which is a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in that you just do it out of the pure joy of doing it without any possibility of like really the success or taking, you don't really, it's just sort of like a childish, sweet fantasy. Like when you ask a little kid what they want to do and they say they want to be like, an astronaut, like they don't really want to go learn how to do all that shit, but they just like the idea of, riding in a rocket ship. So it's kind of like that. We're all just a bunch of little kids that jump on our beds with tennis rackets and kind of fantasize about the idea. But as we grew up a little bit and learned how to play our instruments, it's still fun to make up songs with your friends after school, but you don't even really think you could do that thing. It's especially growing up when I did, it was all on TV, on MTV, or you go to see like, some giant band playing arena. It just seemed so out of touch. And then just kind of cruising around and being a kid in a relatively boring town, you just kind of happen upon this stuff, like you said, like RKL. No one ever called it Rich Kids on LSD, but that's what it stood for, RKL. You'd happen upon that, and then one of your friends would kind of go, "Yeah, those guys are from here," and you'd be like, "From Santa Barbara?" Like, "Yeah, they're from Montecito," which is the sort of fancy part of town, but like, and then you start to kind of read the writing on the wall, like in a weird like 80s teenage hieroglyphic way, where you start to kind of go, "Oh, there's kind of two versions of music. There's like the stuff you see on MTV and see at the arena. And then there's this other sort of subculture that's going on." And I picked it up because there was a college radio station in our hometown called KCSB. There wasn't really a good radio station in our town, but then we found out about KCSB, which was certainly left of the dial. And it was, classic college radio station. And I just figured every city must have one, where you have the monotone, disaffected radio host just going like, "Yeah, anyway, this is another one off of Husker Du's and Arcade. You just heard," like the guy just talking like that. And it just sounds really like unexciting. But then you hear the music and it's just it cracks open this whole universe, and you realize there's this whole other world of bands. And then you start to see the little like shows and flyers, and you just sort of figure it out. Cause kids today, we had to figure it out that way. It was all word of mouth and kind of like deciphering flyers and small newsprint week entertainment weeklies and trying to figure out what's going on, looking at kids that were a little bit older and trying to see what shirts they were wearing and then connecting the dots. And like all of a sudden we found this whole world of underground music, and it just became a kind of, between me and my friends, it became an obsession.
Hello there. A flood tide of filth is engulfing our country in the form of newsstand obscenity and is threatening to pervert an entire generation of our American children. We know that once a person is perverted, it is practically impossible for that person to adjust to normal attitudes.
Keith Brown, the primary singer and songwriter of Popsicko, and when I got in the band we got together, when I got together with him and we started the band that eventually grew into Popsicko, it was like, I mean, honestly, it was a master class. I don't know. I had started really young playing in my own bands, and I got to play in I got some bands that got pretty, like, for a local band, got pretty relatively successful. Like we got down to LA, we were showing our, showcasing for record companies. And I was like 17 years old. So I was kind of had this early start. And then then I fell in with Keith at a time where I was kind of moving back home, kind of licking my wounds because my previous band had fallen apart that I'd hung all my hopes and dreams on, like moved to LA a month after I turned 18 and tried to like make a run for it. And then eventually we fell apart, and I kind of moved back to Santa Barbara just to pick up the pieces. And I connected with Keith, and we just started playing together. And it was like, he kind of became my mentor in a way. I don't think he thought of himself that way. He probably just thought, okay, this guy's fucking got a big mouth and is willing to jump on the phone and seems like he can sort of play bass. So let's, whatever. Somehow we started playing together. But just from being around him, I learned so much about music. Like, he's the one who turned me on to the Replacements. I mean, I had kind of checked out the Replacements, but I was too young to appreciate it. He's the one who like guided me through the records. I was like, no, you got to check out this one. First one he played me was Tim, which is awesome because it's still my favorite Replacements record. And then, turned me on to Big Star, really got me into like, we connected originally because we both really loved like Celebrity Skin, this great band, kind of unknown band called Celebrity Skin. And we loved that era's iteration of this band called Red Cross, that when they were kind of doing their more glammy thing. We both really loved 70s glitter, like Bowie and T-Rex and Mott the Hoople and the Sweet and stuff like that. So that was kind of our little bonding point. But other than that, Keith just started like, he got me into Big Star, got me into Robin Hitchcock. Like, he just used so much cooler shit because he was only like 3 or 4 years older than me. But that makes a difference at that stage of life.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
And just guiding me through like Soul Asylum. I had really dug into Soul Asylum. To me, it was like, oh, is that guy who's dating Winona Ryder or something?
Exactly.
So he really showed me a lot of stuff. And then he was really into gear. He had like this cool vintage guitars and like just knew everything about pedals, like, boutique, unusual guitar pedals and guitars and just even the way he dressed, the way he was with girls. Like, I mean, he was kind of just the cool older brother he was like the cool older rock and roll brother. And he was just a super cool guy, very magnetic, very, very charismatic, but also very kind of, for better or for worse, very broken and very tortured. And all that did for me as a huge music fan was just make me believe him. I was like, I'm in a band with a singer who I would have a poster of hanging on my wall if I went and saw his band play. Like, I look up to this guy and think of him the same way I think of like anybody else that I think is cool, like Iggy Pop or something like that,
It's funny too, Marko, because even though Keith and I were the same age, he did that same thing for me in high school, right? Like, when I met him, I was into like 7 Seconds and the earlier Husker Du and like much harder punk stuff. I was in a band with him for 6 months, and I was into the Velvet Underground and real early glam Bowie and, getting into Alex Chilton. And, it really sort of changed that. So I think because he was such a consumer and such a huge fan of cool music, it kind of just rubbed off on you. I do want to tell a funny story that I was really excited when Marko and Keith ended up in a band together, because we moved from where we grew up in Hermosa Beach, Manhattan Beach, to Santa Barbara. And our high school band started playing in Isla Vista, which is the college town. And, we were just like so deep into Minneapolis for a bunch of Southern California kids. Like, we were like all in on the Replacements, Husker Du, and Soul Asylum. And, we wore the flannels and we wore the jeans and we wore the Chucks, which is funny because it was like our hometown outfit from SST Records filtered through Minneapolis and brought back to us. But like, I had grown up listening to like heavy metal because of my older brothers and stuff, and then had found this music and we were really into that. So we moved to Santa Barbara. We're playing all these parties. Keith was always really ambitious, and he really wanted us to start playing downtown. One of the first shows we played downtown, we were at this bar, and the band we're playing with are these skinny 16 and 17-year-old kids who are like really into the glam metal via Damaged Johnny Thunder vibe. And that was Marko's band. So we were wow. We already got over all that with the teased hair and all that. And we're into the Replacements. What are you guys doing? And it was like, we ended up playing a couple shows together. We never really got to know each other at that point, but I always thought it was kind of beautiful that they ended up playing in a band together.
I always thought you guys had a great band name. I was always jealous of your name because they were called the Wonderfuls. I just thought that was the coolest name ever.
That's a great name. I want to ask you about the Santa Barbara scene because in the oral history, Chris Shiflett, the famous fighter of Foo,
Yes,
mentioned how vibrant the Santa Barbara scene was. Walk me through. What was that like for you guys?
and just to do my due diligence, Chris was the lead guitar player of said glam band that played with Steve.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Band. So we had a band. Okay, fine. I'll say it. We were called Lost Kittens with a Z, of course. Right. Okay. So yeah. So Chris said that about Santa Barbara. I mean, really, we had, like I said, we were kind of a small town. It's less than 100 miles away from LA, but you know, there's just not much for kids to do. And so we would just end up forming bands. It was really incestuous. There wasn't enough people in the town that those of us that were in high school, and then people like Steve and Keith who moved there when they were maybe supposed to be going to college or whatever. So we would end up hanging out with kids that were going to college and playing with their bands because there just wasn't enough bands, you know. And the other cool thing about it is there wasn't enough bands of any one style of music. So that sort of, in a natural, organic way, created this real eclectic, beautiful scene. Almost like when I've studied about things like the early New York scene in CBGBs, where you got like the Ramones and Talking Heads and Blondie and like Richard Hell, and it was kind of like that in Santa Barbara. You'd have some heavy metal band playing with some like rockabilly band, playing with a punk band, playing with a band that sounds like REM or something like that. It was really wonderful in that respect. But we all would just kind of like share bass amps, share girlfriends, share practice spaces, play on the same shows. And, like I said, until Toad the Wet Sprocket and Lagwagon kind of made it, there really wasn't any kind of proof of concept that you could be a local band from Santa Barbara and actually like become commercially successful and make records that people could hear all over the world. I have a flyer with Toad the Wet Sprocket and No Effects on the same flyer.
What?
It's very emblematic of what the Santa Barbara scene was like. It was just basically like there was two Santa Barbaras. There was like the downtown clubs with like the older people in bands that would play that, sounded like Jack Mack and the Heart Attack, like just total fucking crap, typical like small town local bands. And then there was the like scene in Isla Vista, which, Steve had mentioned, we called it IV, where you would play this place called the Red Barn, or you would play in driveways. And then like little by little, we would start to develop in those street shows, and then eventually start to get brave and go downtown and say, hey, we're too young to get into this place, but can you have us play? And
you said you played driveways. Now, was that the name of a bar or a club, or was it actually driveways?
Actual driveways, because you didn't have basements in California, So like the idea of a basement show wasn't really going to happen, and there wasn't really backyards. So when you play out in IV, you basically the play was this: you'd go after school, after you got out of high school, and you go to IV and you jump on your skateboard and you just skateboard down like there's 3 streets. There's Trigo, Sabado Tarde, and Del Playa that run parallel to the cliffs that are over the ocean. And you basically just find some college student who's like out like washing his car or just, hanging out in front of his house. And you'd be like, hey, dude, if we pitch some money for a keg, can you have a party on Friday and let us play in your driveway? And they were like, yeah, like it was like no real negotiation. It'd be like, oh, hey, John, is it cool if these guys buy us a keg and if we move our cars out of the driveway? And that sort of constituted a performance agreement. And we would just write down the address, and then we'd go to Kinko's and make flyers. So that was like how we all kind of grew up.
You know how serious the juvenile delinquency problem has become. Now, if you have some suggestions to offer, we're willing to listen to you. What can we do? And what can you do to prevent juvenile delinquency? You tell us.
Was it Keith that auditioned for Pennywise before joining Popsicko?
Well, I'll let Steve take that one.
Yeah, the town where we grew up, where Keith and I went to high school, was the high school where like Circle Jerks went, Descendants went, Pennywise went. Like it was like rock and roll, punk rock high school for sure. And
Tracy Lords?
What's that?
Tracy Lords, right?
I think she lived around. I don't know if she went to our school. I can't remember. she was definitely around the scene. Our high school band was called the Hoods. That band later became the Wonderfuls. Keith left that band. He quit high school early. He like tested out of high school. And next thing I knew, he was trying out for like the scariest group of dudes in our neighborhood who had started this punk band. And which was funny because Keith was always a pop guy. And suddenly he was singing like really straight up hardcore stuff. And they were great. Like I was kind of like, it was unbelievable to me that guys in our neighborhood could play punk that well. I don't know why I should have been surprised. Like SST Records was around the corner. But he played with them for a little while. But as Fletcher says in the oral history, he started writing love songs and those guys were like, and they ended up parting ways very early. I think Keith
fighters, not lovers.
Keith, I think, recorded maybe a couple demos with them and maybe played like Madame Wong's and a couple of backyard shows, but he was out of the band pretty fast.
And that was before Pennywise. It was before Pennywise became like well-known and famous. Yep. This is when they were like in their local band era, yep. Right?
Now, Steve, you mentioned the name of the band in high school was the Hoods. Now, was that with an S or a Z?
We like I said, we weren't into the whole hair metal thing, so that was with a straight up S. That band was also called the Elephant Men and the P-Bombs. And if you grow up at the beach, you would know what a P-bomb is. You lay in the sand and you pee, and then you throw it at somebody.
Oh my! I think I missed out growing up in California. Yes. That would have been fun.
Now, by the time Popsicko happened, we were all a little bit like past that. We were out of high school. So we still had we had all kind of come through IV because like Steve and Keith, when they first moved you guys lived in IV, right? You must have.
Yeah. We played a lot of those backyard parties and driveway parties for sure.
Totally. So I had come up that way. They had come up that way. All our friends, Chris from the Foo Fighters, everybody in our community came up through those driveway shows in IV. And through this little rented community space called the Red Barn, you could play. Eventually, we started to be able to play in clubs in downtown Santa Barbara, and then eventually start to kind of hey, through a friend of a friend who moved down to LA is playing a show, we can go play with them in LA. Just doing it like that. Then we'd be like, someone knows someone in San Francisco who's going to help us get a show, and so we would just kind of have this little circuit of California shows, and we would just practice all the time and then just go play shows. We were starting to get looked at from record companies, but it was the same old joke where it's like, yeah, we want to hear more. We're definitely interested, but we'll check it out. And finally, we just looked at each other one day. We're like, why don't we just make our own record? Fuck it. Why should we wait till we get a record deal? Why don't we just make the record ourselves? And again, that's credit to all the independent bands and punk bands and stuff that we observed as kids. That gave us permission to sort of hey, you can do this. There's more than one way to do this. You don't just have to wait till you get anointed by the gatekeepers of the industry. You can actually just take action and go make a record. And that's what we did. And that record was off to a bad start.
One of the best things I heard was you guys referred to Popsicko as Cheap Trick meets the Replacements. That was fantastic.
Well, we loved, I mean, Cheap Trick were kind of our patron saints. You know, they were always that band that you know, when you were, I mean, Cheap Trick is something, probably the first band I ever really got into as a kid. But we loved Cheap Trick. And that was one of the few, like, I liked a lot of different bands in my music kind of coming of age, my music journey. But I would like get into something and then kind of lose interest in it, get into something and kind of lose interest. But for some reason with Cheap Trick, they got to sort of come along for the whole ride. They were like one of the constants. I've always kind of identified with Cheap Trick because they've always kind of felt like a flag without a nation. You know, they felt like this band that was like kind of misunderstood. Like, you know, Cheap Trick is like the consummate opening band. Like, you know,
they are.
But anyway, so it's just like something about the underdog, the sort of band like that shoulda, coulda, woulda, you know. And I feel like maybe you got to choose your heroes more carefully because it was like manifest destiny. Like our two biggest patron saints for Popsicko were like Replacements, you know, the poster boys for self-sabotage. To me, the Replacements could have been as big as like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers or something, but they just, you know, they just blocked their own shot every chance they got. And,
absolutely did.
I think it's beautiful though too. Like as a fan, when I first started listening to what Popsicko was doing with Keith and Tim being the two main songwriters, like Keith was the Replacements and Tim was Cheap Trick. Like it's a combination of their two backgrounds and their two writing and singing styles. And it's like, that's why it's such a perfect description, because it really is describing, in my eyes, the two main songwriters.
Right. For sure. And so those were kind of our patron saints. And
now for something completely different.
He had been in this really kind of artsy, weird band that was pretty wonderful called Glitterbug. Very theatrical, like Rocky Horror Picture Show. And like, I guess he was really interested in celebrity skin, like I said. And I had connected him with their drummer, Steve Sherlock, who's the drummer of Nerf Herder. And I get a call from Steve and he's like, hey dude, that guy came by my house and we're actually playing together now. And it's pretty cool. And like, you know, so he started playing in Glitterbug with Keith. And then I moved back to Santa Barbara and Steve and Keith called me up. They're like, hey, Glitterbug's not really happening anymore. You know, we're thinking about starting another thing. So I got together with them and all of a sudden it kind of grew into what became Popsicko. They asked me, do you know any good guitar players? I actually had Chris. I think I hit him up to see if he would want to play, but he was still, you know, living in LA. And then I was like, just brainstorming who's good in this town, who like can play really well, can sing really well, but also looks cool. And I was like, maybe this guy, Tim Cullen. And no one knew about Tim Cullen. Like he was a sort of like, you know, I say this kind of respectfully, but he kind of like dressed sort of dorky. Like he, you know, he had like some like, he just didn't have like a very like, he didn't have a really cool sense of style. And he was known for being a really good guitar player, but I knew he was a really cool guy. I hung out with him a couple times. And we had him come jam, and right away he was just like, he was the guy. Like he just could harmonize like a maniac with Keith, and he could play anything you threw at him. Like, you know, he's just such a great musician and such a fun, hilarious guy, such a smart guy. So it just worked out, and suddenly we had this band. But then Steve didn't really want to do it. Steve was kind of nesting, had his girlfriend, and didn't really want to like play shows. And so eventually we just sort of like, you know, honor among thieves. Instead of kicking him out of the band, what we did was we just started a new band. We just like reinvented ourselves. So our original name was Cardboard Superstars. And we played a couple shows with that lineup with Steve Sherlock. And then we're just like, all right, since Steve doesn't really want to, he doesn't really share our vision and want to go like play shows out of town and just, you know, be as crazy workaholics as we are. Let's just break this band up and start a new band under a different name with the same guys and the same songs. And we sort of, at that time, we sort of used that as an excuse to sort of change our vibe a little bit and kind of indulge more of the like, you know, more of the Replacements-y side and let go of a little bit of the celebrity skin, David Bowie-ish, more theatrical side. And I called up this guy I knew named Mick Flowers, who Lost Kittens had played a show with his old band. He had a band called Naked. And I just had his phone number in my like little, you know, back in the 90s, you know, my little like address book. And I found Mick Flowers and I couldn't get him on the phone. Like it was impossible to get him to call back. You'd leave a message on his answering machine and he wouldn't call you back. I found out where he lived, and I kind of like staked out his house until I saw him walk out of his door. And then I just went up to him and was like, hey, dude, I've been trying to get in touch with you. Like, as soon as like me, Keith, Tim, and Mick started playing music together, it was just like, fuck, this is so meant to be. I found the band that I'm going to like have a, you know, I found the band. I found the one. This is it. And honestly, I still think, and this might be delusions of grandeur or whatever, but like, I honestly think that had Keith lived and overcome some of his situations that he had gotten himself into, we would probably still be a band right now that's like playing with like, you know, playing at some festival somewhere, you know, on our, you know, we'd probably be one of those bands. Popsicko kind of got cut short, you know, which is a shame, but I'm glad we recorded it. I'm glad we documented it. And I'll let the music do the talking. People have to listen to this record and decide for themselves.
What a perfect segue into stepping into the tunes. We're going to talk about some specific cuts off the record. And we've already name dropped some of these references, but as I was scribbling down notes, you know, going through, listening to the record, next to No Better Time, I've got Cheap Trick and I've got Soul Asylum. Take me into No Better Time.
It was written by Tim Cullen, who's our, you know, lead guitar player, whose favorite band of all time easily is Cheap Trick. So No Better Time, I remember when Tim showed us the basic idea of it, and it was like this really cool, I don't have a guitar that's in tune right now, but like it's a really cool chord progression where you like, you know, you kind of start out with just holding a little like D chord, and then you just move your pinky, you know, and kind of create a sort of a B minor vibe into it, you know. So it's a cool like descending chord progression. And honestly, I think at the time we were really inspired by probably Big Star via Teenage Fan Club. So that song to me is like our Teenage Fan Club-y song, you know?
I would say that Keith and I probably saw Soul Asylum in the late 80s about 12 times. So like we were really massive Soul Asylum fans. And to this day, some of the best shows I ever saw, those guys were unbelievable live, going from like While You Were Out into Hang Time. And we were just over the moon about them.
So, but, you know, as far as No Better Time, for the record, you know, really that's just pure Tim Cullen. Like he has such a great pop sensibility. We got compared to the Posies a lot because back then they were sort of making some, at least like critics knew about them and like super music, underground music people knew about them. And we were sort of like the other band that sort of had two lead singers, but Keith was really our lead singer. It's just like Tim would sing for every set of songs we would play live. Tim would probably sing two, you know, he would sing lead on two. So, but I guess, you know, the Posies were the only other band you could come up with that was sort of doing what we were doing, you know. Well, I guess Soul Asylum too, because Dan Murphy would sing lead on some songs, and of course Husker Du. You know, you had Grant Hart singing lead on some songs, and so it was definitely like not an unusual thing to have more than one lead singer, you know.
Right.
But Keith was certainly like the figurehead. He was like the front man. He was the guy standing in the middle singing most of the songs. So.
I want to talk about the guitar solo on the song Story.
Oh, wow.
Which was pretty badass if you go back and listen to it.
I know. I'm trying to just remember it in my head right now without listening to the song to refresh my memory. But yeah, I mean, I can't remember if Keith or Tim played that guitar solo. I'm pretty sure Tim played it, but there are certainly some songs on the record where Keith did the lead guitar playing. And you can, if you really listen to the record a lot, you'll start to get to know which one's which. Like Keith had this very J Mascis, Neil Young sort of, throw the guitar down the staircase and hope it lands on the one kind of thing. Like Keith Moon's approach to drums, like Keith had that with guitar, which I thought was really beautiful. Like, I've always, like, one of my favorite guitar players is Keith Richards. And I just love the idea of just that like reckless abandon that somehow just creates this beauty. Whereas Tim was much more of a precise, articulate guitar player. Like his guitar solos on the record sound a lot more like, he's probably somewhere between Rick Nielsen and Brian May from Queen or something like that. Like he can actually shred like a heavy metal guy if he wanted to, but we never let him. But he came close a few times on the record. But he is, so if it sounds like really articulate and if you play guitar, it's really hard to learn yourself, then it's probably Tim Cullen. And if it sounds like something that is deceptively simple that you could probably figure out how to play, but even when you figure it out, it still doesn't sound right, that's probably Keith.
Was it a little bit of a risk? And I'm not sure where expectations were as you went in to record, but when you tap Linda Ronstadt's producer to work with, that seems like an interesting choice.
Well, okay. So Adam Mitchell was the guy who produced Off to a Bad Start. And we weren't sitting around listening to Linda Ronstadt and going,
you weren't?
Who produced this record? Fuck, let's go get that guy. It was more like this thing happens when you play shows in LA where, you run into, everyone's going to inevitably run into like Kim Fowley, who's going to come up to you and be like, hey, you guys are pretty good. I could play you for some people that I know. And, I'm the guy who discovered the Runaways, and I'm the guy who was raising Kiss. You run into a lot of these like old ghosts, and of which I'm probably becoming now at this stage. When I meet like someone who's 20 years old in the band, they're probably like, they're probably looking at me the same way I looked at like those kind of people. You see Rodney Bingenheimer, you see Kim Fowley. So there's all these kind of old ghosts from former eras still lingering around. And they will go and check out young bands and sort of see like, hey, maybe there's some sport in like finding the next band and trying to get them, shepherding them to a record deal or whatever it is. And so we happen upon this older guy at a show we were playing down in Hollywood at a place called the Coconut Teaser. And this guy comes up to us after we play. And there was a little bit of a buzz on our band back then. So people would be at our shows. There'd be some industry people there and stuff. So, this guy saw us and saw the reaction of the crowd, and he came up to us afterwards. And, I saw him kind of talking to Keith, and then he met all of us, and he just seemed like a nice guy, And then afterwards we'd kind of go back home and have band practice, and Keith would be like, so I talked to that guy, Adam Mitchell, that we met at the Coconut Teaser, and he really wants to try and find a way to work with us. And we're like, who is he? Like, what's his deal? And then he's like, well, he used to work, like he wrote some songs with Kiss, and he produced Linda Ronstadt, and he played the Monterey Pop Festival. He was in a band in the 60s called the Poppers. And I was like, okay, I'm waiting for you to say like, and he's also currently the A&R person for Nirvana. Like, it's like, and why does that matter to us? Like, we're a band in the early 90s trying to like be the next Nirvana. You know what I mean? Like, why does that matter to us? Why does Linda Ronstadt matter to us? And Keith was just like, I think Keith just got really excited because honestly, it was like, basically we didn't have anything else going for us. And he was the only guy that was taking interest in producing us or recording us that had like any kind of like industry cachet whatsoever. Then we started getting together with him and working on some ideas. And to be totally honest, I wasn't really on board. I didn't really get along with him that well. I didn't really like his ideas. I felt like I was probably a little bit jealous because I felt like he had Keith's ear more than than mine, and I was like, oh man, this guy's not gonna. I felt like I was bringing out the best of Keith, and this guy was gonna bring out a side of Keith that was gonna be like, okay, so what do I have to do in order to become successful? And I didn't want him to like take away our edge. Like I didn't want him to. I was really protective of our band, and I was worried that this guy from another era was going to come in and sort of file off our burrs and our edges and all the things that made us kind of raw, really Popsicko. So I sort of had my guard up. I sort of had this chip on my shoulder. And then little by little, once Keith was like, look, I really wanted to produce the record, we all sort of just came around to it. And we started making the record. And, honestly, it felt kind of cool. We were recording the record to tape, and we had this guy who had like made legit records, and he knew the process. I mean, none of us had ever been in the studio before other than just like small little places to make demos. So we didn't really, honestly, we just needed somebody to sort of be our guide through the process of like, what do? You do pre-production. What do you lay down for, I guess, basic tracks? What's a guitar part? What's a overdub? Like what order do we do all this? Like we were just kind of learning, and he was showing us the way. He was kind of this older guy that could show us how to do it. And I think bands make their best records when they have a producer, because bands can be their own worst enemies. You can get so precious about certain things, or like, it's hard to see the forest for the trees. And so it was really nice to not only have a producer, but have a guy who wasn't like some young, cool dude who was like our peer. He was kind of this like older sort of arbiter of good taste. And he was just looking at like, hey, is this in tune or not? Is this in time or not? Is this the right tempo? Is this song, are these lyrics good or not? Like he wasn't thinking about Nirvana and thinking about all the stuff that was happening at that moment. He was just thinking about the history of music and how can I make a record that's going to be timeless? So in retrospect, I feel like it was this huge blessing in disguise that we ended up getting our record produced by this guy.
From a oral history perspective, because I had to be the guy that had to reach out to all these people who were loosely associated with the band, Adam Mitchell was the one sort of outlier because I had never met him. I was not around when Popsicko made the record. I was living in Europe. And so when I reached out to Adam, I really didn't know what to expect. I had some quotes from other people who were around who said this or that about him, but he's nobody that I was connected to. But when I spoke to him about Keith and about Popsicko and about the record, he was so sweet and so thoughtful and had such amazing things to say about the band. And there's a sort of wistfulness to it that like he really thought the band was going to do something too. Like even now, him thinking back on it, it really seemed like he had high hopes for what you guys had created together.
I really do think that, he was probably at a stage in his career where he needed something to kind of give him a fresh coat of relevance, because it was kind of like seen as this like guy from a bygone era. And I think he really did probably see something in us like, hey, this band's going to be my modern rock band that I'm going to produce and maybe be, if had our record come out and become a hit, he could have been like a producer like Butch Vig or something and just gone on to like have a whole enjoy the 90s. And yeah, he said, I met Popsicko by accident. I'd gone to a club and hear some other band. I don't remember who, but Popsicko was also on the bill and they impressed me. I was really stoked when we decided to actually include this book in there, because Steve did so much legwork to find like all these people from our universe, people that were our contemporaries, our friends that were in bands, all of us from the band, Adam Mitchell, this guy Benji, Gordon, guy at a major label who was really, talking about signing us. He's the guy who signed Soul Asylum. So he got some great quotes in there. Fletcher from Pennywise. I mean, it's really cool. It's really cool.
I love the idea of having the book, the oral history, with the album. Was that something you conceived together? Or it was like, all right, let's do the album. And then it was like a light bulb. It's like, no, I should also include a hard copy of the oral history.
That's what we were saying before. It unfolded sort of naturally. It really started with, hey, Marko, I want to ask you some questions. Do you think Mick and Tim will answer some questions? I'll throw it up on my Medium page. When I got the answers back from the three of them, I was really touched by how thoughtful they were and just how much detail and how much energy they put into it. And I was like, hey, this deserves a bigger home. And so Marko connected me to the editor of the Santa Barbara Independent, which was the Hometown Free Weekly. That guy remembered Popsicko. He was really into the idea of doing this oral history of this bygone era as sort of a snapshot of that early mid 90s scene because it was so vibrant. We got really great response from that. Then Marko and I, because we can't stop brainstorming when we're together, we're like, hey, maybe the record needs to come back out. Oh shit, maybe it should come out on vinyl for the first time ever. And I think at that point, he and I both agreed and sort of locked arms around the ideas that this is going to be a vinyl project that comes with a printed oral history of the book. And then we decided to have Marko write the intro. We used a personal essay I wrote as an outro. We added a few quotes from people who were involved in the Popsicko universe. So again, it was very organic, and it just came from this place of like, we can't let people forget this music, and we can't let people forget Keith.
Just both of us being huge music fans to this day, and like, you know, collectors of records and pop culture memorabilia. It's just like I guess sometimes in life you have to feel like, well, there's 8 billion people on this planet. There's got to be a few of them like us, you know, even though this seems kind of very specific and boutique. I know like how I feel when I watch, maybe, you know, a lot of people will like watch the Big Star documentary and then be like, holy shit, there's this whole, it's like discovering the Beatles all over again. You're like, there's this whole other band, or all these people who got like, posthumously got into Graham Parsons or something, where it's like, holy shit, this really cool thing. And it becomes this, you know, so the beauty of art, I mean, you think about, you know, not to compare us to anything as magnificent as like Van Gogh, but like so much art is like in its day sort of unknown, or maybe misunderstood, or maybe cast aside, and, you know, just doesn't really get a chance to blossom under the taller trees around it. But the beautiful thing about time is if good art will find, you know, it'll find its light, you know, and it's not time stamped. This music, you know, you put these songs on, these are about universal human experiences that people are still going through today. So it's not like, oh, this is and, you know, it's not produced in some really like specific, you know, we were never really trying to be trendy. So it's not like you listen to this and go, oh dude, that's so 90s. Like you listen to it and go, this is cool. I mean, you could tell it was probably put out in the 90s, but you know, I feel like these songs, any of these songs could get covered by somebody right now and it would still be a good song. It's not like some, you know. And in the process of putting this together, we were like, well, it's not just the music that makes this band interesting. It's also the story. And I want people to be able to fall in love with, like, find this, like, kind of like, I don't know, find this lost record and then find the lost band attached to this lost record.
No, I think it was Keith who said Popsicko sort of sums up what the band sounds like. But how did you come upon the name Popsicko?
So I'm just kind of like always like, you know, filling up like composition books with like song titles, lyrical vignettes. But like, that's where Popsicko was. It was just on this kind of ongoing list of like cool band name ideas. And when we were coming up with band names, I was vying for Ice Cream Headache. I was like, you guys, that's such a cool name for a band. We should call it that. And for some reason, I just couldn't get everybody on board. They were like, I'm just not feeling it. I'm like, come on. So it led me on this ice cream tangent where I'm like thinking about popsicles and ice cream. And I mean, it's not that interesting of a story, but there was a band in LA called Pop Defect that I would like read about in Flipside magazine. And then there was a DJ named Destructo who would play like raves and stuff. And I just thought Destructo is such a cool name because it's like a play on the word destruction, you know, and Pop Defect, such a cool name because it's like a defective form of pop. So I was like kind of thinking like, how can I steal those ideas and turn it into something for us? And I just kind of came up with Popsicko, and I thought it was just cool. And I don't know if you guys have ever been in a band before, but you know, it's like if you can ever, if 3 out of 4 guys can agree on something, you've got a fucking home run in a band. You know,
run with it.
Yeah.
You know what's cool about the booklet and all the show posters is it dots what surrounded the band as you were writing the music. I mean, it was early 90s. You've got, you know, and geographically you're nestled in between, you know, to the north, you've got the Bay Area, you know, you've got Green Day, early Lookout era.
Right.
To your south, you've got Los Angeles, which comes with its own you've got in Hermosa, you've got your buddies in Pennywise, and you've got No Effects popping up. It's a lot of, so you got SST, you got Fat Records with No Effects, you got Honest On's records, a lot of pop punk coming out of the area at the time. And I think,
which we didn't call pop punk at the time, and maybe we called Green Day pop punk back then, but the only band we really called pop punk back then was probably the early Goo Goo Dolls, when they were like on Metal Blade Records, and they basically were trying to be the Replacements.
Yeah.
But what really like inspired us, aside from our roots with the Replacements and Cheap Trick, what really was like one of our biggest driving forces was the success of Nirvana. Like Nirvana kind of was our proof of concept. We were like, this, to me, Kurt Cobain and Keith Brown were very, very kindred spirits, very similar guys. Like if I go listen to interviews with Kurt Cobain, I feel like it's Keith, it's like this guy could be hilarious and intelligent and charismatic and charming, but also just had this like dark side, that like, and it wasn't a put on, it wasn't like an affectation, like, hey, I'm trying to be the brooding, misunderstood poet. It was just literally like, I have such a pure heart, I can't deal with this fucking world. Like they both had this really interesting parallel. And I feel like of all the bands, and you're not going to hear it in our music, you're not going to put on Popsicko's record and go, oh, this sounds like Nirvana. But I feel like they were really like, we were really inspired by Nirvana a lot. Like they really, I don't say enabled us, but sort of like, they kind of lit our fuse. They kind of made us feel like, hey, this is something we can, gave us a lot of like encouragement.
Yeah. I want to step back into the record for one more song, which is Starless. It's so interesting to me. You're sharing the stage on these bills with Green Day and these other bands, Weezer. The song Starless takes me someplace completely different, which is I still get that Soul Asylum vibe, but I also get notes of, I get Hoodoo Gurus, that Australian band that want to talk about great power pop.
Yeah.
Hoodoo Gurus are a fantastic power pop band. And the Connells. So totally opposite sides of the world. You got Australia, you've got...
I don't know. I mean, Steve probably knows Keith's record collection better than I do, but like, I don't know if he was aware of those bands, but I remember that song being inspired by, we sort of had this, I mean, our band certainly didn't have this kind of Americana element that really showed in our music too much, but we all really loved that record, Hollywood Town Hall by the Jayhawks, that came out, which was like the guy who produced, George Draculius, who had engineered the Black Crowes first two records. Was kind of a protege of Rick Rubin, and he produced this amazing record. It's like, to me, it's like that, those Hollywood Town Hall and whatever that other one was, Tomorrow the Green Grass, the one after it, these really great records. And for some reason, we all loved them. I think Keith liked it because it reminded him of Neil Young. We all just sort of had a reason to like, it was just kind of one of those records, like, back then you'd get a CD or something like that. It would just be like, hey, that for some reason, I just can't stop listening to this, So that might have grown out of, when I think of Starless, I think of us trying to write a Jayhawk song.
Hell yeah, that's perfect.
Taste for the flesh. Now the sky
So did the album actually come out?
Yeah, it came out twice.
Okay.
So it came out, we put it out ourselves on Ice Cream Headache Records. See, I finally got my way.
Well done. Well done,
Yes.
Marko. Well done.
we had to do our like own little vanity label to put it out ourselves. So I was like, well, why don't we call it Ice Cream Headache Records? You know, and so I got that in there somehow. And we pressed up like maybe like 1,000 copies of it. I can't remember. And then a bunch of different that was like late 94, I'm pretty sure. And then we played tons of shows, and we grew so much as a band in the year 1995, which is unfortunately that November would be when Keith would pass away. But we had almost the whole other record's worth of songs incorporated in our set that we were playing with. A song called Lies, a song called Think Too Much, a song called Ashtray Mouth. Actually, Ashtray Mouth is out right now. We put it out as like a sort of pre-single of the record, so you can, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So we did all these things. We did these gigs, and then this none of the major labels really came through, and we just kept on grinding. And eventually, this like guy who was doing an indie label through like some other sort of small indie label in LA was like, "Hey, I wanna like put out this record," and we were like, okay, fuck it. Like we might as well try. Like at least it's a step up the ladder from just doing it ourselves, because we didn't really know what we were doing as far as like servicing it to college radio and sending it to to like, magazines and stuff. So we kind of took it to a certain degree on our own. And then we were like, well, what have we got to lose? Let's do this thing with this small indie label and see if this guy wants to put some energy into it and see what happens. And then in that period of time, this is kind of a weird, dark chapter of the band, is when, this kind of, we had this sort of dark secret in our band that had been getting worse and worse. And that was that Keith had become a drug addict. He had gotten strung out. Again, we were like looking up to Nirvana, and Keith was never one to do anything halfway. So he was like, let's go, and unfortunately he got really into drugs, and it really kind of, it's a shame because he was such a strong guy and such a smart guy. But, it really, we watched it slowly sort of overtake him, and we'd go do showcases and meet with labels, and he'd be sort of acting kind of weird, and it was a shame because he's such a talented guy. And we had so much going for us. And eventually, we had done South by Southwest. We were about to go up north and do what they used to call, I think it was North by Northwest. And we were going to do CMJ. We had all these things. We were going to do 5 shows with this band called Face to Face, which was kind of a punk band. But we had all these things on the books, and things were really moving fast. We had showcases with labels, and then Keith was just deteriorating. And one day we just had this meeting where we're like, me and Mick and Tim kind of got together, and we're like, God, it fucking sucks to have to do this, but I feel like we are being really irresponsible to just keep on, like, the band's moving so fast right now that, like, there's no logical time where this is ever just going to take care of itself. So we kept saying like, well, after we do that show with Green Day, or after we do that South by Southwest, after we do this, then after we have the meeting with Columbia, and then finally we're like, you know what? We just have to cancel everything. We just have to literally cancel everything that's on the books. And we just got in a room with Keith, and we just did the and we didn't know what the fuck we were doing. We did the sort of like intervention, but we didn't have like a professional with us. We just sat there and we're like, dude, we can't do this until you get your shit together. Your drug problem is becoming a liability for the band and for yourself. And I never really talked about this before. Hopefully this is disrespectful to him or anything like that, but I think it's important to know. And, it's not someone's fault if they become a drug addict. It's just like, it's not your fault if you get cancer. It's not like, well, you're the one who wanted to fucking eat Wonder Bread when you were a kid. Or, it's like, it's a disease, and anyone can fucking catch it. Lots of people get it because they start taking pain medication, and then they accidentally never wean themselves off of it. There's no shame in being a drug addict. And unfortunately in society, there is a lot of baggage that comes with it. So people do feel shame, and there's a lot of help for people who fall into that. And, at the time we were just like, dude, kind of just an act of tough love. We're like, we care about this band too much. We care about you as a friend too much. And we got to just stop everything. And then, unfortunately he didn't take it very well. He got really defensive and really offended and kind of thought we were being ingrates. He's like, after everything, cause he paid for the record. He's like, he felt really, really like, which is a natural response when you're the one who's being called out for something that, probably deep down inside you're guilty of, it's that sort of fight or flight syndrome kicks in, and he got really mad at us. And then we just had this kind of ugly little falling out where we just didn't even talk to each other for a while. And Keith went and recorded a song by himself with some different musicians. And we had this really weird kind of thing with the band. And for a while it was like, we kind of felt like it was over. And then little by little, we would start doing shows together again and working it out. But then it just never really felt quite right. And then Keith, we found out, was putting out the record that we had done, that independent record company. We found out he was putting the record out, but he had taken Tim's songs off of it and changed some of the artwork. So we started seeing that like maybe he's like trying to recast this band as like something that was, like maybe he's plotting and scheming to like replace the three of us or something like that. And so it just created a little bit of a weird thing. And we were just trying to find a way to repair it. Tim and I had formed this like band together on the side called Cooler. And we were starting to do some shows, and we were having a lot of fun, and a lot of record companies that were interested in Popsicko were coming to see us. And we were like, well, I don't know, maybe we just have to let it go. Like, we didn't really know. We didn't have like closure. We didn't really know what the future for Popsicko was going to be like, but we knew this record was coming out. And, sadly enough, that record was slated to come out in late November, and Keith was running down to LA back and forth to like meet with the guy who was going to put it out. And he was trying to get his shit together. Like, he would be sober for like a week, and then he would get nervous because he had a really important meeting in LA, and maybe he would come back to Santa Barbara and use, and then go back. And unfortunately, long story short, he was on his way back to LA to have a meeting about our record, and he was in a car accident, and that was it. It was like Hiroshima in our local music scene. It was just like, we were just like, it was such a tremendous loss because everybody in town was like rooting for Popsicko, rooting for Keith, thought he was going to be the next Kurt Cobain, and just like, so it was a real huge loss. Obviously he was just a young kid. He was like in his early 20s. So, obviously everybody was just on so many levels, his girlfriend, his parents, his band members, his friends. It was a real sad loss. And the record came out 2 weeks later. And the record happened to be called Off to a Bad Start, So it was kind of we just kind of went, oof, I don't know, man. There was really no happy ending. So in a way, doing this project now is our way of kind of correcting that situation and kind of going, wait a minute here, this record's going to survive all of us. Let's not let the version of it that doesn't really represent Popsicko be the version that people can find online or at a used record store for 99 cents on CD. Let's put the definitive version of this. And so we restored the songs, put Tim's songs back on it, restored the sequence, changed the artwork, but it's all pictures of us together and we tweaked the front cover a little bit, but it's still the same photo that was used on the original one. We put our classic logo back on it. And like I said, we have the book that comes with it that tells the story. We've got all this memorabilia. So it really is like our attempt, with Steve's amazing efforts here to kind of like correct the record, literally and figuratively.
I have to say that the title of the oral history to Would Have Beens, that's one of my favorite tracks on the album. It's so Replacement-esque to me. And then the title, and like you said, every city has a band that shoulda, woulda, coulda, and it's just it's a tragic story, but like you said, the music lives on. Right.
And it's incredible. It's incredible to like go back and listen. Usually you go back and look at your baby pictures and you're like, oh God, how did my mom dress me like that?
Yeah.
But in this case, we go back and listen to this record, and it's bittersweet because it really does I mean, I have objectivity now because I don't even remember how to play these songs anymore. So I'm just listening to it as though I'm a fan, and I'm holding it up to the same standards I hold every record up to, and I'm listening to it. And obviously there's an emotional connection to it because I was in the band, and one of my, like heroes was our lead singer. But like, just as a music fan, I listen to it and I go, these songs are fucking great. It actually sounds better in retrospect than I remember it sounding. It confirms that Keith was the real deal. When I go back and listen to this now, I'm like, this guy has been gone since November 7th of 95. And here we are in February of 2023, and I put this record on and it's like Keith's right there. You're listening to his voice, you're listening to his point of view. And it's just, it's really cool. But at the same time, it's bittersweet because you just think, God damn, this guy had so much more to say. And, but at the same time, thank goodness we actually captured that lightning in a bottle.
Keith, you mentioned earlier liking the title To Would Have Been. There's an extra layer to that. That was actually the only song that made it from the Wonderfuls demo tapes into Popsicko. So I actually played drums on the original version of To Would Have Beens in our previous band. And so it really encapsulated all the personalities and connections to Keith and to the music that are involved in this project.
2, 3.
What I should do. If I slow down and look around, I might as well have stopped. The aspirations I once knew, mixed up and forgot. So I'm sitting on this bar stool, I put my money down my throat. And if you walked in, I'd show a grin, my wretched curse be broke. I'm stuck here with myself and all the things that could have been. Don't you see it's you I need to bring my soul back in, to bring my soaking soul back in.
Folks listening to this, you can't see, but Marko's holding up the album and the book. It looks like great packaging. I mean, it really looks like you did a nice job. It reminded me a little bit, I hate to bring it up again, but like what they're doing with the replacement packages.
We got really lucky, and I'm glad you pointed that out. When you do something like this, that is, again, it's not a great business decision to like put a lot of time and energy into reintroducing a small group of people to a band that they maybe forgot or hadn't heard of in a long time. But most people had never heard of Popsicko. It mattered a lot to us. Right? Like what we were doing this for, the reasons we were doing it, the impetus for it really came from the heart. So we really needed to have the right partner. And because I had an existing relationship with Christina and Rex at Big Stir, I told Marko from the beginning, I'm like, listen, you got to talk to these guys because I think they are exactly the right personality types. And they put so much care into what they do. And when I told them about the possibility of working on this, like they were all in just because they saw how much it meant to me. And It's very rare in this business to meet those kinds of people who are willing to take those kinds of emotional risks, but also run a legit label and know what they're doing in the music.
We 100%. We when you asked earlier, like why now? It's because of Big Stir. If we wouldn't have met Rex and Christina at Big Stir and had them on board to do this with us, me and the guys in Popsicko would still be going, well, when I'm done doing my thing, I gotta go deal with this thing. We'd still be talking up this, we'd still be kicking the can down the street for another 10 years. And so the fact that they were willing to get on board, once Steve introduced me to Rex and Christina, and I saw that they had this again, you can't put out a record that's a labor of love on a label that's not a labor of love. So it's like the perfect marriage. Their label is a labor of love. I want to say a label of love, but the stuff, if you look at Big Stir's catalog, it's like they just love music and it's like boutique. It's stuff that has, small audiences, but people that really fucking love music up close and love the details of it. And I just saw like, we could just put this out ourselves, but I was like, I want to put it out. I want to find, someone who could put this out and give it the right, get it to the kinds of people that are the types of people that are going to have a predisposed to wanting to find the hidden gems, the little like diamonds in the rough. And so I feel like we were so fortunate. I mean, finding Big Stir was really the catalyst to this project happening. If it's probably a cross between, if I say like Coulter's Medium blog post plus, the text thread between me and Coulter about his Medium blog post plus his relationship with Big Stir, which is probably from the brother Steve. Is that what it's from?
Yeah.
Equals this record happening. This is our tribute to our friend who died young, and like none of us want to do this half-assed. We're like, this has to sound great. This has to look great. This has to feel great. I mean, Steve knows what a pain in the ass I am. It's like every little detail. I mean, I will proofread the fucking press release and like change the wording, change the adjectives, change the fucking punctuation. We care about every little detail because Keith's not here to say anything about it. So I feel like we kind of have to. And so like this record is the result. The fact this book and this, I mean, even the fucking duct tape on here was like micromanaged. Like nothing, no stone was left unturned. So like everything about this record, nothing about it was like phoned in or rushed through or pushed through just to be expedient. It was like, this is going to take as long as it takes to get it right. And when it's right, we're going to put it out. And now we're going to put it out April 28th. But there's only going to be a limited amount of the vinyl and the book that comes with the vinyl.
It's very cool packaging. Very cool.
Thank you.
Give yourself some credit. I think if Tim doesn't go on to form Summer Camp, if Marko, if you don't go on to play, geez, let's do the resume. The Ataris, you were in Bad Astronaut, you play with Sugar Cult. I mean, you've had a measurable amount of success on your own, and that Summer Camp record is.
Oh yeah, Summer Camp Pure Juice is great, and the record they made after it that never got put out is fucking phenomenal. I wish you guys could hear it, but yeah.
Well, maybe you guys can put us in touch with Tim, and we'll do an abandoned albums on that lost record.
Oh man!
But between the surviving members of the band, you guys have all gone on to have prolific careers and gather your own fans in your own right. So there is an audience that this record will have an orbit with, and there will be people that it finds its footing with. So I think it's a very cool thing to do.
I hope so, and I want to just make that point since you bring it up that like all of these things that we did, these subsequent things that we did are connected to Popsicko. I want you to know that all those things we did, even Nick when he played in the Rentals, he met Matt Sharp when Weezer played with us and with Popsicko a few times. We played with them in LA, we played with them in Santa Barbara, and so he knew Matt Sharp, and that helped become the reason why he became the drummer in the Rentals for a little while, because it was like, dude, I actually knew you from a previous life. And just, it's so weird how Popsicko kind of like somehow became the fertilizer that grew our futures. It's a trip.
That's great. Before we wrap up, I want to ask one question. What are you guys listening to now?
There's a band out of Kansas City called The Whiffs that I really love. They're like garagey, punky, power pop. They're on a label out of Virginia called Dig Records. There's another band on that same label called Paint Fumes. And I'm really into this band from Philadelphia called Second Grade, modern power pop, really fantastic songwriting, great energy. So definitely all in a power pop vein.
Steve's been nailing it lately with like digging up really cool new bands. He just turned me on to two bands that have quickly become bands. I'm like texting all my friends. I'm like, you got to check this out. This is so cool. And again, to me, it's not just about the music. It's always the context is always important. And if I know that there's like a scene developing or a new movement, and especially when you find out that they're super young, he turned me on to this guy who's like 18 or 19 called Billy Tibbles. You heard of him? Dude,
no.
Look, Tibbals. Go look it up after this is done. Other band Steve turned me on to called the Uni Boys, You and I.
One of the absolute hands down best records of 2022. And they're like these guys in their early 20s who are just playing like straight up hooky rock and roll. And there's like this whole scene forming around them in LA. It's amazing. I know a lot of these because I interview them for the Big Takeover magazine, who I do a lot of writing for. There's a Minneapolis trio called Loki's Folly, and it's 3 siblings, 21-year-old singer, 16-year-old drummer, 12-year-old bass player. And they have a song called Beaches and Peaches. It's their first single, and it's like the way I describe it to myself is the Slits meets the Tom Tom Club. But they have another song called, I think, Appease the Girl on the same record, and Dave Pirner plays guitar on it, and it's super heavy.
Love Dave Pirner.
This is my favorite game, by the way, to go around the room and go, okay, the Whiffs, Billy Tibbles, Loki's Folly. I'm gonna contribute one, which is if you are not hip to the band Daisy, D-A-Z-Y, fix that now.
Okay, I'm gonna look it up right now.
So
Holy
good.
shit.
So
it's
good.
it's like the Cars and the Jesus and Mary chain had a love baby that turned out perfect.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
I was actually just trading emails with that guy James Goodson a couple of days ago. I had interviewed him for the Big Takeover. That record blew me away. I'm 100%.
I can't stop. I can't stop listening to
Yeah,
it.
so good.
Well, listen, I want to wrap it up here. Any final thoughts, Steve, Marko?
I just want to say thank you. You know, obviously, Keith, you and I have done this podcast a couple times before. That we did like the 2020 episode together, I think.
Correct.
When Marko and I started talking about this and it seemed like it was going to come to life, I was like, oh man, we got to go on the Abandoned Albums podcast. This is like exactly what this show is made for. And on top of that, Keith's a really cool guy. So, dude, you and Jeff have been really cool to do this and let us talk about this for 2 hours. And I can't thank you enough for giving us a platform to be able to talk about this project that means so much to us.
I can't agree more, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time and energy to listen to all my fucking wild ramblings about this. It's obviously like something that we are so excited that this is being able to see the light of day, and it's just, you know, it's a story that needs to be told. It's music that it's a record that needs to be heard, and you know, above all, you know, this is, to me, it's just our duty as people that we're lucky enough to be in Keith Brown's all too short life to do whatever we can to kind of like be sure that he is just not lost to the sands of time. And this is the only way we know how, you know, to put out a record and a book.
And it's a good record, and it's a great book.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, this is, you know, to meet two guys like you who are passionate about, you know, unknown music, to have a whole podcast about it and have it resonate with you is like exactly just like, it makes it all worth it. You're just like, if I can have 40 other people just like you who like this record, then I'll feel like we were fucking superstars. You know, it's just, you know, gets out there, and then, you know, you'll tell your friends about it. People listen to this and tell their friends about it. And that's the beauty of word of mouth and great records that you know, need to be talked about and listened to and passed around.
What's that old commercial from when we were kids, from the shampoo and so on and so on and so on?
It was so good, I told 2 friends about it, and they told 2 friends, and so on, and so on, and so on. Be sure and get the original.
I don't remember that one.
You're dating yourself, homie.
It was in black and white. We had this little... No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, guys. I'm going to end my recording now. Many thanks to Marko and Steve.
Our theme song is Rocket Sled by Blip. Abandoned Albums was recorded at Thunder Love Studios.
Produced and written by Keith R. Higgins and Jeff Calhoun.
Engineered and mixed by Steve Beasley with the help of Mike Hunt. Edited by AJ Royce.
The songs you heard on this podcast were all taken from the Popsicko album Off to a Bad Start, and they were Nastasia, Getting Used to You, No Better Time, Starless, and Two Would Have Beens. The album comes out on April 28th on Big Stir Records. It will be accompanied by an oral history of Popsicko's all too short career. Be sure to check out the links in our notes section.
Original music by Mike Pellegrino.
If you like what you've heard, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating. It really does help. Thanks for listening.
At Twitter, we are at Abandon Albums, and on Instagram, we are at Abandon_albums.
Grazie. Bailey Leaf. Rob Janicki. Mike Pellegrino. Therina Vella. Ronnie Barnett. S.W. Lauden. Michael Janicki. Peyton Janicki. And our executive producer,
Rufus Thunderlove.
And now, until we meet again next time, I remain as always obediently yours.
Abandon Albums is a production of Paw Print Media.